Welcome to the John Gets Games introduction to It's a Wonderful Kingdom. In this video, I'll be giving you a brief idea of what the game is like to play, and you can learn more details about the game by watching the tutorial that I made where I teach all of the rules while the game is being played. You can find a link to that tutorial in the description of this video. Now, It's a Wonderful Kingdom is a 1 to 2 player game that takes about 45 to 60 minutes to play, and it puts each player in the role of the ruler of a kingdom trying to be more prosperous than their opponent. Now, this game entirely works around a deck of cards, and in each of the game's 4 rounds, players are going to draw up a hand of cards and then play them out 2 at a time into 1 or 2 piles in the middle of the table. After that, their opponent is going to take all of the cards from one of those piles. So that means you want to spread the good cards out so your opponent does not get all of them. And you also might have cards in your hand that you want. So you might put those into piles that you think your opponent will not take, so that when it's their turn and they put cards out, you could then take a card that you put out earlier. Now, when you play It's a Wonderful Kingdom, you always use one of several different modules. These can bring in menaces that you do not want to take from these piles. They also might bring in advisors, which will let you spend resources to gain extra benefits, and there are other modules that you can mix in as well. Now, in the tutorial that I made, I emphasized the menace module, and when you use that, you actually pick one out of many different menaces, and when you play those into the card pool, well, your opponent is probably not going to take those cards because they're bad. Now, fortunately, within each of the game's 4 rounds, you can place up to 2 cards face down, and those are called traps. Now, those could be good cards that you want your opponent to avoid so that you could take them on your next turn, or you might hide a menace under there that your opponent will then have to deal with if they end up taking those cards. After all cards have been offered, players will have a pile of cards in front of them, and each card can either be turned into a building under construction that needs specific resources to be completed, or they could recycle that card, discarding it to the supply to gain a resource or 2 that they can then put immediately onto buildings already under construction. Once a building has all of its resources, you can put it into your built area, and then in each of the game's rounds, you are going to produce all of the resources that show up on your completed buildings. Those resources can be placed immediately onto buildings that are under construction that can then go into your completed pile and might even make resources for you within that single game round. And this is really how you are competing with your opponent. You're trying to build up as big of a resource engine as you can, because most of these cards are worth points, and the more resources you have means the more buildings you can construct to gain more points before the game is over. So what this means is you have tons of decisions in this game trying to figure out which cards you put into the offers so that you can try to bait your opponent into taking bad ones or lure them away from the cards that you really want. And of course, you can see the cards that are under construction for your opponent and plan around that. You also need to be very careful to have the right cards to get the resources that you need to complete the buildings that are going to be good for you, especially considering many of these buildings give you conditional points or extra resources depending on what other buildings you have completed. And you have to keep all of this in mind as you attempt to build a better engine than your opponent. Of course, if you're playing with the menace module, you must also contend with these menaces that are going to be slowing your engine down in a variety of ways, and you have to try and fight those off with soldier tokens, which you can acquire by constructing many of the buildings in the game. Now, I have just briefly covered most of what's going on in this game, but there's definitely more to delve here, and if you'd like to learn more details about it, then please check out the tutorial that I made where I teach all of these rules as the game is being played.